Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the International Cannabis Conversation on Trichomes. I'm your host, Chris Day, co-founder of the Global Cannabis Network Collective, and I want to thank Trichomes again for every week letting me sort of take this tour around the world of cannabis and bringing you all great individuals and companies who are helping us to expand the global marketplace and really informing us on trends and topics that we all need more information on to navigate successfully the waters of this quickly changing industry. Today, I'm really pleased to bring to you a guest who I've known for a number of years, who has been really at the forefront of working with companies around the world in a variety of just different testing applications. Jules Sinclair is the Director of Special Projects, I think is the right title. Is that right, Jules?
That's
With
right.
Emerald Scientific. So tell me, Jules, what is the Director of Special Projects for Emerald Scientific? I love the title, by the way.
Thank you. Well, I really have varying roles, as the title alludes to. I manage a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I worked with our Emerald test, which is our interlaboratory comparison proficiency test. I work with procurement. I manage some of our webinars and speakers, and a little of this and a little of that currently.
Yeah, it's funny in cannabis, right? So many of us end up holding so many hats. I know when we first talked, you were primarily leading up the Emerald conference. We just did a webinar about a week ago with the GCNC looking at sort of what events are happening around the world. What's the current status of the Emerald conference?
Well, we're still working with the scientific committee, which is highly important. So we've got a little over 25 scientists that are working in the industry that come together, and we discuss the important topics of the day, and they do all of the planning for all of the content for the conference. So we didn't have a conference this year. It will be back again February next year in San Diego. As you know, MJ Biz bought the conference from Emerald Scientific last year, right after we had a successful conference, and still doing some consulting work with them and helping them to get everything moved over into their realm.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll turn out well in the long run. Short run is always a doozy, right, with the pandemic. But I'm glad to hear that scientific panel is still together and meeting, because I always thought that was something unique that Emerald Scientific did, was really coalescing so many different opinions and perspectives out of the scientific community to really help inform the cannabis industry. It's something that is often, I think, lost, or people end up in their little silos and don't really get the breadth of perspective on what is out there in the scientific world. So glad to hear that's still going and that you're still engaged with that. So let's talk a little bit about the Emerald test, because you mentioned that and the proficiency testing. And as we describe it, you and I have talked about it quite a lot over the years, but let's go right to the base of why it was created and what the intent is for people who may not have heard of it before. Sure.
I'm going to go back just a little bit. It helps to tell kind of the story of Emerald Scientific, the founding of the Emerald Conference and the Emerald Test. When our company was first started, our founders were honestly thinking about starting an analytical laboratory. And in speaking with the labs out on the West Coast, they discovered that it was really hard for any of the scientists to get the supplies that they needed in order to start researching how to test cannabis. So they decided to open up a distribution company worked with a couple of different manufacturers that agreed to sell directly through Emerald Scientific, and Emerald Scientific was born. So we work solely in the cannabis and hemp space, and that's really important because it gives us kind of that, that know-how. We work one-on-one with the scientists within the industry, and we see what they're doing. We talk through some of their issues with them. We've got a great technical support staff that, really can highlight and help all of the laboratories and facilities that are doing testing or manufacturing to find the right products that they need. So the Emerald Conference was started because the scientists in the industry were having a difficult time in trying to figure out, exactly what's going to be the best method for us to use to, even figure out how to do potency. You think, 5-6 years ago, scientists struggling to figure out how do we test potency and do it accurately. So the Emerald Conference was born out of that. We brought together some scientists and we were able to work with them. And it turned out to be a really great thing. Lots of collaborations started from that very first Emerald Conference, and people kept coming back year after year after year after year. So then the natural progression of things is with any analytical laboratory in other industries, food industries, pharmaceutical, oil, they have what's called a proficiency test. And that's basically the laboratory is testing itself to make sure that their methods are valid, that they're working, they're accurate. And the Emerald test was born out of that idea. Let's bring all of these analytical labs together, let them do a test to check the accuracy of what they're testing, and then we'll compare that to each other. So the Emerald test is an interlaboratory comparison proficiency test, which is a little bit different from a general proficiency test because you get a comparison of what's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's helpful to see that. I was talking to a company out of Australia actually the other day, and they were talking about testing of products and the fact that, with EU GMP certification, as an example, having EU GMP certified facilities is really important. And because it helps to ensure the quality, you send product out to a lab and it comes back and you're either within spec or not. But they were running into a challenge because they had labs in different markets where they work, where one test comes back slightly different. And because certain countries have such tight specifications, based on one test, it came back and they were in spec, and on another, they were out. And so it was really frustrating that the labs weren't coordinated and performing at the same rates. And my understanding of what you're doing is trying to minimize those kind of discrepancies so that there's consistency across the board. Is that accurate?
It's definitely accurate. What we'll see is that participants within the Emerald test, they not only can tell how well they're doing, but they can tell how well they're doing in comparison to other laboratories. So we look at, methods, you look at the equipment that's being used. All of that has greatly matured, since the beginning of the Emerald test. So our first test was in 2014. It was for one compound, Delta-9 THC, in a solution. We had 14 participants in that test. And this last spring round, we had over 140 participants from 12 different countries, and we had over 25 different tests. Various matrices. We were testing in pesticides, residual solvents, microbiology, potency, of course. I'm forgetting something. But, and things like hard candy, chocolate, flour, oils. And that's really important because when we're looking at the cannabis products that are being manufactured all over the world, you want to be able to test, you want to know how well you're doing in your testing methods. And it's really hard in smaller countries, especially that, are just getting started in the space. You need to have something to help you to measure what you're doing. And one of those is an interlaboratory comparison.
Yep. Yeah. And I know on your website, you put out a lot of stories and information on the emerald test itself and sort of how you guys work. So I would encourage listeners and viewers of the podcast, if you really want to dig down into the details or get involved, to make sure you go by Emerald Scientific's website, because there's a lot of information there that takes what we're talking about and then amplifies the information 100 times in terms of detail. And of course, if you're a GCNC member, you can find it behind the firewall, a lot of the information there as well, for which we provide for members. So you mentioned that this has grown into a program that 140 different labs participated in, and 12 different countries. Have you seen certain regions of the world being sort of more interested in getting engaged than others? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, so we've gotten a lot of participation from the European market, Canada, and we're starting to see more and more participation from South America as well.
Well, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have seen in looking at European markets, right? There's such a need for testing there. It's a very pragmatic approach, right? Everything needs to be very tight and buttoned up. And South America is, I think, beginning to realize how important that is for their aspirations of really engaging as a product supply hub to the rest of the world. So it's nice to see that sync up. It'll be interesting to see if we can get close to a global standard at some point. That's my personal hope, because I think it would help with international trade tremendously.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, really when you look at a quality assurance program that's built into manufacturing, part of that is going to be testing and proficiency testing and how well that testing is done. It's the foundation of a good quality product, is to ensure that you've got a quality assurance system in place and can back up your product.
Yeah. Now, if you're talking to labs that want to get involved, right? You can't possibly be running this all year, right? There's going to be certain times of the year to get engaged and all that. What's sort of the timing cycle that you generally run against when you're working on the test?
So we operate the test twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. We're going to start enrollment for the fall round, I believe the second week in August this year. There's information at pt.emeraldscientific.com that will have all of the full round of the testing. So we start enrollment, runs for about 2 weeks. We close the enrollment, sample ship out about 2 weeks after that, and then everyone gets all of their results submitted. It's evaluated by our ISO accredited PT manufacturer. And then we go through the process of analyzing all of those results. And some people do well enough that they are able to earn an Emerald badge. So the Emerald badge is kind of our good housekeeping quality symbol of approval for breweries that do especially well within the parameters of the test.
Good. So when you say people do especially well, and they have this, for the layperson who doesn't own a lab, doesn't participate, why does that matter? I mean, what does that tell other people along the supply chain that the benefit is? Right.
So you want an analytical laboratory or even an in-house analytical facility. So we have some manufacturers that have an in-house laboratory and they're testing their own products. They're using that as a kind of a first round before they actually send off to a third party analytical testing, and can kind of cross-reference their results with the results from the third party testing facility. So what you want to see is that what you're finding, what your analysis is in tune with what the PT provider the manufacturer knows the result to be. So if I say, the manufacturer says your THC amount for this is supposed to be 15%, you're in that wonderful realm that you're very close to accurate. So we do have variance, and you're going to find variance in all industries. So we hear a lot of times that someone will say, oh, one lab said that my potency was 16%, and the other one said it was 18%. You are going to have some difference. It depends on the methodology. It depends on the equipment. You're going to have to, we're going to have to get to a point where something that the labs can say, this is the method that we're going to use. It's an approved method, and those are being worked on. So it's, until we get to that point where we have those methods and they're approved and, they've been tested, tried, and true, we're all still trying to do the best that we can do.
Yeah. Now, are you guys engaged in, and this is one of those questions that we didn't talk about before, and I didn't pre-brief it. It just popped into my head. So feel free to dodge if you want. But I'm just wondering, like, if you all were engaged in those kinds of conversations with emerging markets or other countries on figuring out what those testing parameters in each nation or region should look like. It seems to me like that would be an area where the politicians of the world trying to put this stuff together could really benefit from some actual expertise.
Well, regulators definitely can utilize some of the data to kind of see how the industry is performing as a whole, right? So if we see that, we've got 25 labs that are participating in a particular test, and they're all over here on the mark. So the graph goes here, and we want people to be on the dots within the graph line, but they're all over here. So we can look at that and we can say, well, something isn't right there. So there's something else that we haven't quite figured out yet. And, we're still very much in our infancy as far as analytical testing goes. So it is a way for regulators to understand, where things are going correct and where things are a little off kilter.
Yeah. Well, my hope is that they all continue to look to things like the Emerald test and others to help that kind of discussion. I do think it's often forgotten in cannabis today, because those of us who have spent a few years here, it feels like we've been here for decades. But you forget how nascent the industry really is. Yeah. And even in quote unquote mature markets, a lot of these types of discussions and tests are still being refined. Yeah. And so in brand new markets, even the notion of testing the laboratory, so testing the testers, is unique, right? Because some places just want a lab. Mm-hmm. I was talking to folks in Peru not all that long ago, and just having a lab set up to test cannabis alone was a challenge because it's such a nascent market. So I'm glad these kinds of conversations continue and that we can talk about them here because it helps really educate people on the sophistication being built into the legal cannabis markets worldwide. So as you sort of look towards the future, Jules, of where Emerald Scientific is going to be most focused and continuing to grow the Emerald test itself in that research, where do you think sort of the biggest opportunities lie for your business and for the industry overall in looking at providing this kind of consistency?
Yeah, so if I was going to talk about Emerald Scientific in general, we're poised to open up a Canadian branch of Emerald Scientific soon. We are kind of moderating what's going on in the Latin American market and eager to follow that and see where that can lead us and how we can help. And we're definitely open to anyone reaching out to, ask for any type of assistance. We've got some very good resources, lots of past conference videos that talk about some of the challenges that we faced some of the early markets can really benefit from some of those early on videos that we have there. So we're just early on. There's going to be a lot of growth,
Well, that's great. And I want to thank you for coming on today. For those of you out there in the internet land, you can find all of these resources that Jules is talking about at emeraldscientific.com. And you can always reach out to us at the International Cannabis Conversation to help facilitate connectivity if you have a hard time finding those resources. But I can tell you from past experience, Jules Sinclair is not trying to hide. She's pretty easy to find via social media and at Emerald Scientific. So again, thank you, Jules, for joining us. Thanks everybody out there for tuning in to us every week. If you haven't subscribed yet, why the heck not? It's really easy. Just hit that little button, subscribe, and make sure you don't miss an episode. Have a great week, everyone.